All right. So, my hope with doing this is to try and give um, some context to the College Fantasy Football League that's starting this year. This is a new format for a lot of you. I want to be able to make sure that it makes sense to those that are new to it, that have never played in anything like this. They kind of have a good base, and also kind of give some context for things for those of you that have never or that have played in the format but have never done some of the tweaks. So there are a few of you, I think maybe a fourth, that have played in NCFF or NFL University, that have played in a format, have a general idea with these things, and then just kind of discuss why we're doing things differently, what I wanted to try with this format over the last few years, and why kind of this league came to be. So I'm going to work through a portion of the bylaws, see how far I can record this for, and maybe upload this in parts, just to kind of give people some ideas of things, let them ask questions, especially before we do a startup auction draft. So first and foremost, league page here, everyone should have access to this. And we're going to kind of work through it. I'm also just going to work down through the bylaws. So the bylaws should be available to everyone. They should be linked in Slack. So you've probably seen a few people spam this over the weeks, but a few people found that if you type in on Slack link to the bylaws, a link pops up and it takes you to this page. And so these are the rules. I tried to make this as thorough as possible so everyone can have access to the rules. It's going to be an evergreen document, so we'll keep updating this as the years go on and we kind of get new rules in place. And I kind of try to make it as thorough as possible so there's not as much confusion for new people, for old people that are able to reference back to the document. The goal is to kind of have this be a place that people can find their answers if necessary. I know it's a dense document, but I wanted to be thorough, be very concise with why I'm doing these things as much as possible. So these are the bylaws. Calendar for the year. This calendar that's in place is kind of what I'm thinking the overall structure of a league year looks like. First year, 1st of February, right around the Super Bowl time, I'm going to be looking for buy-ins to be due each and every year. That way, once MFL does roll over, we kind of have our ability to start filling in vacancies, putting new coaches in, letting people shuffle around to teams that they want to play as, and kind of then have that spring, end of winter, early spring as kind of the time to really do our recruiting for new people to come and join us in this format. As you know, I'm really trying to work hard to recruit people now for our startup, but this is hopefully the time of the year that we get new people in. You guys tell your friends that might be interested in trying a new format, or other people in your leagues that might be interested in a new format. That's the time of the year that we're going to be really pushing to do those things. In a typical year, May 1st, May and June will be kind of our auction time. I want to do everything after the NFL draft, but give us enough time in this late spring, early summer to do all of our auctioning. It's kind of a lull of the year. A lot of leagues do their rookie drafts in that time frame, and I'm kind of trying to mirror the same, but make sure that everything's post NFL draft, so we know where players are going and we know when they were drafted, which teams are going to, that sort of thing. And then after those auction drafts are done, most of the summer will be dedicated to allowing people to schedule their games. We'll talk about scheduling here in a bit, but ultimately the goal is to allow for that July, August timeframe for you guys to schedule. You know what everyone's team looks like. You'll be able to schedule the games, and we'll go over how to do those things. Regular season, week 1 of end of August, we will have the ability to start the regular season, and everything kind of kicks off, and we'll go over all those things. And then the end of the year will be kind of the maintenance part, when we'll go over like player awards, early declares, NFL draft stuff, and all those things. League platform, everyone knows we're on MFL. The reason why we're on MFL is that because it gives us the capacity to really pick and choose the players that we want. We can add can't add lists. We can change players' positions pretty easily. We also can kind of keep track of what the player's eligibility is. We'll go over it as an example, but we can look at players and say that this is a junior, this is a senior. We can annotate red shirts, all that, and that's not capable on things like ESPN, Yahoo, even Sleeper does not have those capabilities. Sleeper doesn't really have the capabilities, to my understanding, as of yet, to do auctions. So that's a big part of it. I really love the marketplace being the dictation of how players are acquired, the value of players, etc. So the other big thing is we're all on Slack. I really want Slack to be the primary communication device in this league. I think it's valuable for an organizational standpoint for me. I can put you guys into your own conference specific chats on other platforms like GroupMe. It can become like a waterfall of different chats that pop up. And for me, doing this with 100 people, it can become overbearing, cumbersome, and it really helps from an organizational standpoint for my end to be able to see everything, have you guys in dedicated chats if necessary, but also give you guys the freedom to chat with each other, also communicate with conference opponents, schedule things, those types of things is important. And I think Slack helps keep all that stuff really organized. The other big thing with Slack is that I can do some of this coding. So I referenced the link to the bylaws question, and a lot of that ends up helping. Like we can try to automate some of these things. So as normal questions, FAQs kind of things come up, we can try to steer Slack to kind of help with that burden. People don't have to pester me. They can ask these questions. We can also set up like alerts on certain channels, which I hope to do in the future. And like, I think I have it listed. I don't know if everyone's in this one yet, but what I hope to do is have this announcement one be kind of this catch-all for everyone where no one really posts in it besides me, but we can put the announcements of like, this is the deadline date, blah, 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 and really kind of have this be a house. The other beauty about Slack is people can kind of tailor this to their own experience that they want. Like you can end up with some of these options over here. You can mute things, you can change things to your liking. You can mute the channel details. You're able to mute a lot of the options and really tailor it to the experience you want. So if you only want to hear certain channels, you can mute them. You can also walk out of certain public ones to your leisure. I really want it to be tailored to people's experience. What they want to put in is what they can get out of it. So I think Slack can help with those things more than other platforms. With that said, I really want to use Slack as the primary communication device. I don't want to have to be posting on MFL as much as I have to. I don't want to be posting in emails because I can get direct feedback pretty immediately. I also don't want to have to keep jumping into different buckets to communicate with people. I know that doesn't always work for everyone, and I understand that people are busy. That's why I try to advocate for tailor Slack to how you want to experience this league. But with that in mind, 100 people, tracking down 100 people through 3 different avenues is tedious, to say the least. And if you want to be in this league, I think people can make the effort to make sure that they're keeping up to date on posts on Slack. So we'll kind of make sure Slack is the primary communication device. And then if things are necessary through email, we'll work to do that. Buy-in payouts. Everything's collected through League Safe, so everyone should be getting kind of a invite over the next few weeks, months, looking to have payouts or buy-ins placed. I want everyone to be paid up before the beginning of May, if we can. That way we have a little bit of a buffer to tidy up anyone that doesn't pay. We can get them out, get new people in, and be ready to go with the startup without really any hiccups or big delays. So I'm really pushing for early May to have everything kind of tied up with a bow and we're ready to go, and everyone's is set and aware of the expectation for the startup. Buy-ins $50 and $25. We'll talk a little bit about the structure of the league in a second, but all those buy-ins are paid up for a total. We pay MFL we deduct some of it from the total pool for maintenance fees. So we pay for a deluxe league, and that costs about $140 for early pricing. And yeah, can't really avoid that. So hopefully I have a total pot of 4,360. Each conference champion will get $50. Each division champion, so we'll go over conferences and divisions in a second, but each of those will have $50 allocated to them as well for division champs. And then if you win a conference, you get an additional $50. And that goes for both Power 5 and minor league conference. And then the payouts that we primarily do are top 25. So at the end of the year, we have a top 25 national ranking. We'll go over how that is calculated and everything later. But essentially, the payouts will be based on where you rank at the end of the year. And I think this is a valuable, a better way of doing these, from the standpoint that we kind of blend a mix of accomplishments. So conference champion, division champions, those are types of accomplishments that teams get, and they get an award or a amount of money based off of that. And then there's also the top 25. And the top 25 is kind of your look at your entire season. You accomplish these things, and you get in a set amount. And really the base is that if you make the top 25, you essentially wipe out, you get what you paid. You're in the top fourth of the league, and anything above that is you making a yield, or you're able to yield some sort of money. We'll go over kind of how these are priced, but this is just essentially the tabulation, and it all scales up. So each spot almost scales up by $5 until you get to the higher tier monies, and then it scales up where the national champion gets $600. So a little blend of your seasonal accomplishments, how well you do over the course of an entire season, and then a few team accomplishment things where if I win the conference or I win the division, I'm still making money. And most of the playoff teams that get to the top 8 of the nation have more payouts stacked on top of this. So they're usually conference champions, they're usually divisional champions. So they're making more money on top of what they would get for their national ranking. So they might make, instead of the third ranked pace team, might be a conference champion, meaning they won the division as well. That's instead of $235, that's $335. So there's a little bit of nuance to it. It won't mean everyone's getting the top third team of each year is going to get the same amount as the year previously or the next year, but there's always the opportunity to do that. This also gives stake that if you don't make the playoffs, there's still opportunities to make money or recoup your funds. So I think that's a really great blend and allows people to stay engaged over the course of the season. Schools and conferences, one sec. Hopefully everyone knows we're gunning for 100 teams. That's the total amount that MFL allows. So we're hoping for 100 total schools for the year. Breaking that out to 6 conferences, 5 Power 5 conferences is your typical ACC, Big 10, Big 12, Pac-12, SEC schools. And then we have one encompassing minor league conference, or not minor league conference, just minor conference. The Power 5 conferences are all 8 schools per division, so 16 per conference. And then the minor league conferences are 2 divisions of 10 teams, so 20 total for that conference. And this helps us get to that full 100. This also kind of is why we have 2 different payout or buy-in brackets, because minor league conferences has a few more teams per conference than what the Power 5 does. So this kind of offsets that change in price structure. The fact that they're having probably more diluted rosters, that this kind of help those differences. Schools are chosen based on the conference makeup. So we're picking ACC teams to be in the ACC primarily, Big Ten, blah, 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 et cetera, et cetera. But we do, to fill in some of these conferences to get to that 16 or that 20, we made some embellishments. We chose them based on primary geographical locations compared to the rest of the conference. So teams like Cincinnati or Notre Dame that are in like the Big 12 and Big 10 in this format were chosen because of the teams that they would play, their rivalries that they have in real life, plus their geographical location and stuff like that. We already have had this, and I've made this rule change in the bylaws from those who have read it, but you have the ability to change out some of those teams that are those sort of embellished schools if the school is vacant. So if someone owns that team, can't take them. If they're if they're an FBS school, so we're not going to take like James Madison schools and put them into this league. It's just not the rationale that we're looking for. That within the same geographical locations, I just don't want to put schools or change schools that are from the West Coast into the East Coast. I'll make a little bit of gratuitous one. The switch that we did make this year so far was we used to have USF, South Florida, in the ACC. And a guy who was an alum of Connecticut said, "Can I switch this out?" And USF had not been owned at the time. Said, "You know, thinking about it, I can satisfy all these requirements. I'm more than comfortable making that change." And the other big one is the quality of graphics. I want this certain aesthetic, and this bleeds into the next bullet points, but certain aesthetic in the league, I think it helps kind of keep everything uniform, has the same type of visuals, quality that everyone can come to expect. And I'm supplying all these. So it's not rough to ask that if you're going to make these requests, that I can at least get the quality of graphics to the same tier as what I've been able to find for everything else. And if I can't, I'm going to probably ask you not to, just because I do find this important from a commissioning standpoint and a pride in this league, that if the league looks good, I think a lot more people feel more interested in it. I think they like to see a level of consistency and professionalism, especially as the leagues get bigger. The janky MFL formats or banners that don't look the same, or team logos that look different dimensions, I think kind of deteriorates from the immersion of the league. And I think this helps. So that's one of the stipulations, is what I put for graphics. All right, 1 second again. Now we get into the nuts and bolts of kind of the league itself. Rosters, player pools, everyone, every conference has access to 2 player copies of players. No school is able to have 2 copies of a player on their team. No one's able to have 2 copies of Jonathan Taylor. MFL won't let you. Players cannot be traded for any reason. Copies will stay inside their conferences. So no copies of Jonathan Taylor. If there's 2 in one conference, there will stay 2. One of those copies can't leap to Big Ten or another conference somewhere else. And that's MFL enforced. We set that rule and requirement, and it's kind of a MFL dictated thing. If you do let it bleed over, things get kind of really crazy. And those who have been in leagues like NCFF have noticed that can become a real hindrance on the fluidity of the league, having to account for things like duplicates and which conference has a copy available and which ones don't. It just becomes monotonous and hard to deal with those things. 30 total roster spots. I wanted this league to be big. I wanted it to allow people to make the teams that they want, per se, to be able to put diamonds in the rough and really keep them on their squad and let them grow and blossom over the course of their eligibility, if at all possible. Starting lineups are 8 players total, 1 QB, 1 to 3 running backs, and 1 to 6 wide receivers. The reason for this is I find this, I wanted to see bigger lineups to the point where some of this depth that you have from the 30-man rosters come into play. You don't have to have the full 30-man roster, but I wanted to see some of these depth, some of these third wide receivers, unknowns, tight ends, get some more run. And I think doing these larger startup lineups, startup larger rosters allow for better ability to navigate injuries, allow for bye week coverage to be better. So hopefully that'll kind of allow for some different levels of strategy that I've seen in this format. Instead of seeing the same 6 players being played every week, or 7 players, we see it extended a little more, and allow for some different parity in the league. And one point I will make, I've been very staunch on one QB every week. I think the QB position is super valuable, especially in this format. I think it's something you have to be competitive. And I think it's valuable that it's a requirement to be there each and every week, to have a starting lineup with a quarterback in it. Doesn't mean that you have to play your quarterback, and we'll talk about some of the rationale for red shirts and things like that. But ultimately, the idea is quarterbacks are valuable. There's fewer of them. Hopefully the multiple copies helps with in terms of every team being able to have access to 1, 2, sometimes maybe 3, to cover bye weeks and things like that. But I think that strategy is a very interesting element and might take a bit of getting used to for some teams that are new to the format or haven't played in a format like that. But I think it's leads to some different dynamics, especially with how scoring is set up, which we'll get over in a second. School lineups will carry week over week. So if you set up a lineup, it'll carry the next week. This will hopefully allow for better league maintenance, people that feel comfortable with just leaving the same squad that they have from week to week. They don't have to touch anything. One thing I will say is new is that I'm expecting everyone to have 8 active players. So red shirts we'll talk about in a second, but I want there to be a full lineup each and every week. Players can be started that are on buys or that are injured and out. I understand there's a lot more strategy to it, and I'm more than willing to let those things fall where they may, as long as there's reason for those. But I want there to be 8 full man lineups each week. I don't want to see 6. I don't want to see 7. So if I see that you're not starting a quarterback and you're trying to redshirt someone, or they're on medical, I'm going to ask you to get a quarterback in there. So some of it's planning. Is it just throwing cannon fodder, a 3rd string quarterback out onto your starting lineup to make sure that they're present and available? Will be something that I'm going to make sure people are doing, because I want to make sure people are active, paying attention, and also not leaving duds on the field without cause or reason. Not to be restrictive, but I want the national rankings and all this stuff, there's a lot of competitiveness in this type of format, and little edges like that become rough when it could mean the fact that a team doesn't get it ranked as high. So hopefully that makes sense. If not, ask questions, but ultimately I want there to be a full active lineup for every team each week. So if there isn't, we'll have to discuss those things. Scoring's listed in here, but essentially what it boils down to is it's a kind of half point PPR, half point points per first down for players, except for quarterbacks are at 0.2, so a little bit less, but they're still valuable. So the strategy of this is that wide receivers, tight ends still have a benefit from points per first down and points per reception, to buoy them, and they have a lot longer tail in terms of players that will be available and productive for you, whereas you'll find quarterbacks and running backs in this format have a higher premium because they tend to be really high scorers if they're really, really productive, but there's fewer of them, and that's why you're paying for a premium. So I'm okay with all those dynamics, and if there's things that people want to see changed with the points, I'm really looking for rationales, not just like, well, let's do this, let's change it up to this. I want to see reasons why, if people have them, just to kind of make sure that we're doing things for the right reasons and playing in the format for the right reasons. But I think this should be pretty balanced, but also forgiving, where I know that if there are discrepancies like really high QB scoring, it's because the part of it's the format. You're dealing with players and the NFL experience 1 to 4. Patrick Mahomes is going to be inherently 10 times more valuable in this format than like a Sam Darnold is. So it's hard to gauge and buoy those types of expectations on evaluations of a player and their market rate. But I think at least with the auction system, those discrepancies get worked out in a competitive format. Eligibility, we kind of talked about this. This is really try to mirror in college football. So you are looking at players with 1 to 4 years of NFL experience primarily. NFL will dictate what a player's experience is. And what I mean by that is when we go to a player. We look at their stats for the year. MFL will be kind of the final say of what the player's eligibility will be. Let's see, my computer will load here. But let's use Deshaun Watson for an example. MFL will dictate what their experience is, and if they're over 6 years, we know they're not going to be included in the player pool. There might be discrepancies in when it comes to red shirts on what a player's eligibility is, but this will kind of dictate their base eligibility when they came into the NFL, when the clock started on their eligibility. So if a player was undrafted or isn't on a team in this league or in your conference, the clock is still going to keep rolling. Hopefully that'll make sense the more we play. But MFL will kind of be the last say when it comes to that, and that's just because it's easy. Everyone can access this and see those things, and hopefully that makes sense to a lot of people. Once all copies of a player have been used up, I'm going to add them to a can't add list on MFL. That way they don't show up in the player pool anymore. But players that might have a red shirt applied to them, they might still be available, but they will be dictated where they have like a graduate designation to them. And that'll show in here. So this is kind of what the roster page will look like. So players will be listed here, points, their copy 1 info, copy 2 info, and that's kind of what this is saying in this table that's on the bylaws. So a player like Christian McCaffrey, copy 1 would say the team that owns them, the eligibility they have, and if they had a red shirt like this copy 2 example, it would list the type of red shirt, and R means a traditional, and the year that it was applied. And then players like Damian Harris for this example was in Georgia Tech, freshman currently, and had a medical red shirt that was applied in 2019. So this hopefully gives everyone the info that they need when they're looking at players and understanding who's available, who isn't. Is there another copy of this player still out in the player pool, or are they owned, or they've graduated, like this Ezekiel Elliott example where he received a red shirt. He would still be a senior if this was last year. He's graduated at this point, but it would list the graduate for that one copy, knowing that if anyone were to come looking for him, I know there's a copy that's owned at Florida State. The other copy I shouldn't be touching. I shouldn't be trying to grab him in the auction even if he shows up in the pool, because he's not available. And I'm going to go through these rosters after all the auctions are said and done and before the season, and making sure all the players are appropriate. And if they're not, they're going to get removed from your team, so you can't even use them. So it just helps me with quick identification. It should help you with quick identification on who's available, who isn't. And then if you have questions on who is ultimately available, there's a report. You can find it in MFL. Go to reports, go to player, reports, player, come down to the complete free agent listing. You'll select your conference that you're in, unless it already does that for you, but all that information will be populated over on this end. You'll see all the players that are unowned or available. There's 2 copies. It won't tell you there's 2 copies, but you'll be able to see that there's at least 1 copy. So that will hopefully help you in terms of figuring out who's available for an auction or upperclassmen, blah, blah, blah. Red shirts. 2 different types of red shirts in this league. There's a traditional and a medical. Traditionals are reserved for any incoming freshmen, and it's only freshmen. I know in college football they can be applied to anyone, but those who are familiar with NCFF have come to love the intricacies of making that choice in a very limited window of when you're going to redshirt someone. And I think it's a very interesting choice and strategic element to a league where you have one point in time to make a decision. Do I want to use their year one, or do I want to punt for year 5 and think that they're going to have a more productive year? And for me personally, a lot of these traditional red shirts end up becoming, I'm going to redshirt quarterbacks and wide receivers. And that's just become a matter of efficiency and my own personal preference. But that's kind of what I'm using them for. Differences for this one compared to others: there's unlimited amount of traditionals that you can give as long as they're able to be applied to an eligible freshman. So if you have 14 freshmen on your team and none of them have played a game for you this year and they're all on your taxi squad, they all can get a red shirt for next year, and be extended. So I'm not limiting that, but which is a difference for those who have played in NCFF. Reason for it is I think the way I kind of have organized this, it will make it easier for me and also open the doors for you. The fact that I require every freshman that wants a red shirt to be on taxi squad as of week 1. And then once week 1 kicks off, I am locking taxi squad for the rest of the year. So once they're on there and that time frame is kicked over or ticked over, I am locking it so you can't futz with the taxi squad at that point. And the reason for it, it helps limit people from trying to switch them over. I know this doesn't necessarily allow you to make those changes like, oh, I'm going to burn this red shirt. You are not locked into having that player as a redshirted player once week 1 kicks over. If you want to play them, let's say week 2 happens, someone gets injured, and you say, I want to play this player. Like I was going to redshirt Trevor Lawrence, but my quarterback ended up tearing his ACL or something week 2. And I'm a good team. I maybe want to play Trevor Lawrence. Well, you can still do that. You'll just simply ask me with a PM or something like that in Slack and say, hey, I'd like to promote Trevor Lawrence off my taxi squad. One, that gives me the indication that you don't understand what you're doing. Like I am removing him. I'm going to burn his red shirt. And it also allows me to kind of control those factors. People aren't switching players on and off their taxi squad willy-nilly. They're actively making a conscious decision. And I think that helps both of those fronts with that kind of player. So prior to week 1, I'm going to have taxi squad open. You can make all the changes you want, switch people up. But once the kickoff of week 1's game, the Thursday night game each year, I'm going to lock it so no one can make those adjustments. So if they're not on there and you don't even play them for the entire year, they're still not going to get a red shirt. That's a stipulation. I'm going to be very hard on that. So I'm going to make sure that there's plenty of acknowledgement and announcements on those things ahead of time, but ultimately I'm going to be very staunch and strict on that format. Medicals. So if you're in like NFLU, this is something that's a little bit different from that type of league where you only get one red shirt for them, and that could be a traditional or a medical. So a lot of people skew towards traditional, but medicals could be given to players after up to week 4, I think, something like that. We can do both, and this is somewhat what NCFF does. We can do medicals in this one where a player could have a 6th year of eligibility or be in year 6 of their NFL career and still be playing on their last leg of eligibility because they got a traditional and a medical. And a medical is reserved for a player that gets knocked out for the year early on in the year and they essentially didn't get to play many games to the point where it's like a factor of really affecting their eligibility. It's kind of like a waiver. The big difference for us is that I'm not dealing with starts. I think in other leagues there have been factors of have you started them 4 games up to like week 9 of the NFL season. I'm just going to cut it off at week 5 prior to the kickoff of the week 5 season, so they've got to play 4 games. Again, I'm going to cut off the ability to add and move players off of IR. Once they're on IR and they stay on IR for the rest of the year, they get their medical, because I'm going to make it a hard cutoff, black and white, that if they're on there prior to week 5, they get it. So if they've been injured in the preseason and they sit on there for the entire year, they get a medical just as much as if they got injured at the end of week 4 and get placed on IR and they sit on the rest of the season and they've started 4 games, they still get a medical. Only stipulation, you only get one medical per their eligibility. So once a player gets it, they can never get one again. They will lose their IR designation if they are if they lose their IR designation on MFL. Let's say like last season, they had a bunch of players that could be on IR for a very short period of time. They came off of their NFL team's IR. If they're still on your IR on MFL, they are fine. They have to first be on IR on an NFL team to be eligible to go onto your MFL IR. So I can't add a player that's just out for a week and put him on there. No, he has to be literally designated for IR on MFL before he's eligible to go on yours. And even if they lose that tag, but they're already on your IR spot, they are okay. They will still have a medical. So you don't have to worry about, oh crap, Philadelphia brought back Dallas Goedert. No, this is based on you using the player. So if you have not used him, not brought him off of your IR, not wanted to burn this medical, you still will have that preserved. So hopefully that makes sense. That's always been kind of gray area. When does it apply? When does it not? But I'm trying to make it as inclusive as possible, but not be too inclusive to the point where it's going to be a hindrance and be too gratuitous towards people that have a player that plays half a season or something. Scheduling. I'm going to get through these ones until standing, and then we'll just kind of cut it off and process this one until do the next half afterwards. But scheduling is important. You have the ability to schedule some of your games in this league. Kind of go over the rough, and this is bound to change based on whatever the NFL ends up doing with their scheduling changes for the next couple of years. We're going to play it as we're going to see how it goes this year. I'm not planning on making any changes right now because I don't think everyone knows how it's going to work out and what the NFL teams are going to do with any additional games being played. So we're going to stick to the schedule this year and see how things go, or if something becomes too tumultuous prior, we might change things, but right now I'm not expecting any. There's a 12-game regular season. Weeks 1 through 12 of the NFL season is how this coincides. Power 5 schools play 7 games reserved for their division opponents. That's weeks 6 through 12, including week 6. So they'll play all their division opponents for them, and that's all set kind of based on how they schedule these 2 games. 2 games for cross-conference opponents, so like SEC East teams will play SEC West teams. This will be week 4 and 5. And then the first 3 weeks of the season are all non-conference. So for Power 5 schools, you'll be able to schedule games from weeks 1 through 5. So almost 50% of your schedule is something that you can have control over, who you play. And we'll talk about national rankings and how that applies. But you have some control over who you play as. And I think that's a very cool experience to have. You get to play against your friends. You get to play against rivals that you might develop in this league. I think it's an offering that is very unique and very fun and very strategic that I don't think a lot of leagues offer. So that's pretty cool. And I think it's very, very unique for this format. Minor league schools, it's a little bit more restrictive, and that's primarily because there's just more teams in your division. So you're going to play all 9 of your divisional opponents. So Mountain West teams are going to play the other Mountain West teams, and that's going to take up 9 games of your season. So week 4 is 12 will be all Mountain West or MAC opponents, whichever you're playing in. And then the 3 games will be non-conference, which you'll be able to schedule those as well. And I wish I could offer more of those things, but wanted to make sure that you guys got to play all your divisional opponents, and that's an important piece of this. So scheduling games. On our website, there will be a link that everyone has access to. This will be called scheduling right down there in the links. And this will carry you to a module that I built. And the module is essentially how you guys are going to see and schedule your games over the summer. And really what it comes down to is that this gives you hopefully the ability to really schedule things. And you can see some of these examples in here, but all the teams will be listed down here, and you'll be able to see who's played. You'll see the weeks that teams are able to be playing as. You can filter all these things. So let's say I wanted to look for a game against a ACC opponent, or I wanted to see the rest of my division's games. You can see all of them, filter them, and see all the information you need in a very concise format, which I think is a big benefit of using a tool like Google Data Studios. So this is where you're going to be scheduling games. Ultimately, how you should be scheduling is you're going to look for a vacancy, and usually they're highlighted in green. You'll see who's available. You can see these teams. So what, like, this is an example, but Boston College wanted to play Buffalo. For whatever reason, they might be friends, they might want to play, or there might be a strategic element that they feel like this is a tough opponent. He's going to help me in the national rankings, and we'll talk about it in a second. But this is helpful, and all of our coaches' names, so you can get in touch with them on Slack or however you want to. But you can work and say, I wanted to play the opponent in Buffalo. You're going to come to this form over here, type your email address, which week you're scheduling for, non-conference, cross division, weeks 4 or 5, what school you are. It's all all scrollable, who you're playing against. And the important thing for getting these things scheduled is, like, this is the perfect example. North Carolina State came in here, put in this information. They wanted to play, I think it was me. They put it down as Wisconsin, but it'll show a pending for which school you're wanting to play, and it'll show a pending, meaning that the other person has not put a inverse submission in. And what I mean is that they haven't put that they wanted to play you the same week. So they're going to come in like Buffalo and Boston College did. They each filled out the form. Buffalo put which school they are. Boston College put what school they are. They said they're playing against each other. And essentially that means to my formula or my sheet that I have all this stuff populating to automatically is that there's an inverse in entry put in, and it means it's confirming that both coaches want to play against each other, and then it will show up in this form. So once, like, North Carolina State's opponent that they put into, or Wisconsin, that's me. Once I put in it, it'll change this pending to show my icon, meaning North Carolina State is confirmed to play Wisconsin week 1 of the season. And so it's a bit interesting, and it's a bit forgiving of a format. So if you put in more than one entry, it's going to mess with the machine or mess with the formulas. So I really ask people, give it some patience when they start using this, not just spam 5 Boston Colleges versus Buffalo, because the system is not going to know what to do with it. It's just going to put you as a pending, and hopefully that'll be valuable enough. But let's talk a little bit about kind of the rationale for the scheduling, and that comes down to oh, I need to finish the schedule. I apologize. Something to keep in track of each game that you win over the season. So this will be talked about later. I'll bring it up. But each game you win this in the season, post game or postseason and regular season, is gets you $1 recruiting dollar. So it's advantageous for people to play teams that they think they can win because they get dollars amounts. There's also the advantage of all right. You spend $1 or you make $1 for every win that you get. And the reason for this is that it gives teams that are maybe not feeling like they're a competitive team this year to schedule games against teams that they think they can win against. The advantage is that when a postseason comes around, they still have the opportunity to also get a bowl game, which is an opportunity to boost your national ranking at the end of the year, but also get more wins, more recruiting dollars for next season. So there's a bit of strategic elements to how you want to schedule your games. The division winners of each conference go to a Week 13 conference championship, and they are able to play against each other. It's important because the winner of that goes to the national playoffs. The only exception is minor conferences. Their conference champion does not have an automatic bid for the playoffs, and that's kind of one of the factors of why they pay less than the other conferences. So there's elements of when you want to who you want to schedule because it has an impact on national rankings, and we'll talk about that in just a second. And then there's the postseason factor of if you win your division, you get to go to conference championships. Weeks 14 through 16 of the NFL regular season. There's the 18 playoff. I said this, the Power Five conference championship champions are all invited. Then there's 3 at-large bids, which are awarded to the next highest 3 teams at the national rankings at the end of week 3 of the regular season. Seeding in the playoffs will be decided by national rankings at the end of week 13. So the number 1 ranked team will receive the number 1 seed, and they'll play the worst ranked team out of those 8. Bowl games will be weeks 14 and 15. Schools with 6 or more wins are invited to play in a bowl game. In the event of the odd number, the highest ranked, nationally ranked 5-win team will be invited. Matchups will be determined by national rankings at the completion of week 13 of the regular season. What this does mean, and I know this goes against kind of the immersion of college football, but I think this plays into payouts a lot more importantly, is that you could end up playing conference opponents or teams that you were previously played in the season again in a bowl game. And reason for this again is that where you rank nationally at the end of the bowl postseason plays out to payouts. So I think it's important that you still get the competitive edge of playing against a team that's similarly strength and having the opportunity to further improve your national ranking. Whereas if we try to select and be like, you don't play SEC teams against each other, we would deteriorate that at the end of the season. I think that would be worse trade-off than just playing teams that you've already played or conference opponents. All this plays into the national rankings. So on MFL, there's going to be a tab for national rankings. It'll be called rankings. This is where people can see the rankings as they're calculated week over week. This is a cool little module that's embedded in here and allows people to see kind of how things shake out, where they sit with the rankings year over year. But first and foremost, just talking about how rankings are calculated. Rankings are primarily looking at how many wins you get in a year. So they take your wins, they add 1 to it to make sure everyone's able to have 1 number in that heavy number, because if they have a 0, then their points wouldn't calculate for a national ranking. But number of wins that you get plus 1. So if go to this page, didn't load. I wanted to. There we go. So it'll go to this page. It'll be 13 points plus, or 13 plus 1. So that's 14. That's for Georgia Tech. And then it multiplies it by this aggregate score of your own all play percentage plus your opponent's all play percentage. So this is where it's important to pick teams that are better when you schedule your game, because ultimately it will help buoy your ranking as you look at this. And how that breaks down is kind of this chart over here. There's this XY plot where average is 50% of your all play versus 50% of your opponent's all play. And the thinking is that 50 and 50 is essentially 1. So it becomes a 1. And when you multiply that based on your wins, that doesn't change your wins whatsoever. So you are essentially playing average, and whatever you won is you're an average win of average 8-win team. That's kind of how that works out. So the better you score is more you're going to skew to this right. So I'm a higher scoring team, I'm going to likely have a higher all play, which means I'm going to have a likelier higher aggregate. So teams like this is a different league that I used to test this, but I had a 66% all play last year. That pumps up my aggregate score, which means my wins for a team is higher. And it also factors into your opponents. So you can see the opponent one is 64% And when you add those two opponent or those all plays together, it comes out to 1.31. And that 1.31 is then multiplied by my wins. And what that means is my wins will essentially become, well, let's use the Georgia Tech example. So Georgia Tech here has got 1.43. Very good. They have an 86% all play. They played just a slightly above average slate of opponents for the year. And this includes your conference opponents, your non-conference opponents, your cross-conference opponents. All of those factor in over the course of the season, and they come out to that 56%. And it's only the weeks that you played them that it factors in. So if a team has their quarterback out for the week and you chose to play them that week, well, they're likely not going to score the same as they would have had that quarterback in. And so their all play for that week will probably be factored into that opponent all play versus had you scheduled them for a week that they're at full strength. It's kind of how that adjusts by looking at it by week. So with that said, 1.43 is then multiplied by the 13 or 14, apologies, because you add the 1, and that's how that comes out to this 20, and that's how everyone is ranked in the national rankings. The way I view this is that it really takes a factor of how good you are. It takes a factor of how good your opponents are when you play them, and matches them together and then compares to how well you win. I think winning in this league means a lot. So if you win games, you should be rewarded for that, and it should factor in. But I do think to stratify the field enough to make sure that the good teams are making the leaps up the board that are necessary comes into effect when they factor in how good they score over the course of a season and how tough of the opponents that they play for the course of the season. So the way I look at this chart often when I'm looking at it to make sure it's working correctly, the top right are teams that score really well and play really hard teams. So the farther you are to the right, the better your score should be buoyed. Your wins should be scored higher. The opponents to the left here, you are not as high of a scorer, but you're playing a tougher slate of games. You're probably more of an average team. So you're going to see scores along this line. It's like 1-for-1 line is kind of 1, what it would calculate for a 1. And anything over that line will be below a 1, meaning their wins will be kind of detracted from each other. And then if it's above 1, their wins are kind of getting a boost in score or in national ranking. Hoping I'm saying this right. So it all makes sense in my head, but I want to make sure it makes sense in everyone else's. And I'm trying to be as transparent about this as possible because frustration on why people rank where they are is definitely something I've seen in this format. And it's obviously something I can empathize with, like not understanding why I rank where I rank is important for this to really feel like it's a fun, challenging, fair league. So I think this hopefully does that. And please ask questions about it. I'm trying to be transparent by showing the math, showing these charts where you can really tangibly see, oh yeah, Georgia Tech is a really good team. They definitely deserve to be up at the top versus like a team like Ohio State, which is a 12-2 team, and they're more of they have an aggregate score of about average. So that's why they're ranked at 7th, and Georgia Tech is ranked at 1, and their score is 8 points higher, and that's quite a bit more in this league. So really where it comes down to is that these will break into tiers, like 8-win teams are on the same tier and stratified by maybe 2 wins at the most. There's not going to be like a 5-win difference over teams ahead of you or behind you. They're probably going to be within 2. So like a 8-win team is primarily going to be mixed in with 8s, a few 7s, and a couple 9s, depending on where they fall. But everyone's in a relative strength of each other where they end up ranking, and I think that's important for a format like this. So that's national rankings, and then like I said, those factor in playoff at-large bids, bowl game matchups, end-of-year payouts. All of those help factor in, so it's important to get that right. Lastly, what I'm going to talk about is just conference standings. Conference standings are important to determine who is the division winners and ultimately who goes on to the conference championships and who gets automatic berths in the playoffs. And those are all extremely important for payouts, player awards, blah blah blah. So the following is kind of how we break it down: conference win-loss percentage, so how many wins you get inside your conference, and that includes cross-conference games. Your head-to-head record, so if you have tied with a team but you beat them earlier in the year, you're going to be ranked higher than them in the conference standings. Division win-loss percentage, so based on who you played in your division, if because that's how it'll be compared. If you look at the page here, everyone's broken out by their division. So it'll rank based on the conference win percentage, then it'll be ranked on head to head, and then it'll rank it on how you fared in playing your division. So it'll take out those week 4 and 5 or whatever and break it out for a minor. It'll just kind of skip over this because you'll only be playing your division. And then lastly, higher national rank. So this will factor in kind of who maybe would win the division based on where they rank in the season. Hopefully it shouldn't get to that. There's enough tiebreakers in there, and you have to play all your divisional opponents. This will just hopefully factor in for 3-4-way ties, which sometimes do happen in this format. So with all that said, I am going to pause here. I'm going to get this half out. I'm going to try and make sure I talk about this next piece because this is a little more, I think, in-depth and nuanced to where it factors in. These apply to the nuts and bolts of how the league kind of operates from a in-season standpoint. The national rankings, the standings, the points, the scoring, the eligibility, all those things kind of factor in for the nuts and bolts of how the league operates in season. The next piece will be kind of talking about out of season. Once the season's over, how do these things apply? Things like the auctions, the awards, the NFL draft, transfers, vacancies, all that stuff will be kind of like the off-season things that we'll focus on and we'll talk about. And I'll hopefully get that out at a date. So please, hopefully this is helpful. Hopefully this is engaging. Hopefully this brings up questions on strategy, on effectiveness of things that I'm choosing to do. Hopefully this brings some level of enjoyment that maybe you understand the format a bit more and you're getting a bit more excited about startup. Hoping all these things can be applied and we can have a really fun league together. So let me know if you have questions, please. Otherwise, I'll check you later.